Welcome back to Inside Criminal Minds, the series dedicated to analyzing an elite FBI team. If you are new to the series, there is a link in the description down below to catch you up. This episode begins with something I normally do not like, but considering Reed saw someone almost unalive himself in the last episode, seeing him in a more comedic scene does wonders for his character. And also, it's interesting that he's using science and magic to cope, which will be visited again in the future. Anyway, Reed takes film canisters, water, and a piece of Alka-Seltzer to launch the makeshift rocket. An experiment you can do at home if you could only find an actual film canister. The first one hints Prentice, prompting her to ask to see it again. This time the rocket falls at the feet of Hotch, and his reaction is priceless due to the fact that he walks up all angry, but immediately shows his softer side by cracking a joke. And during this interaction, we learn that Morgan is going back home for his mother's birthday. That's when we see Morgan mourning in a graveyard with someone taking pictures, slightly ominous. Then he goes to the store for some ingredients with his sister, and they meet up with a gangster named Rodney. During this exchange, we learn a bit about their history.
Badass now because they pay you to wear that gun, Mr. FBI?
Rodney, I proved a long time ago I don't need a gun to take you out.
Past history? That's a dangerous thing for you to count on, my friend.
And Morgan is able to defuse the situation. At the youth center, more pictures are being taken of Morgan as he spectates some football practice. Afterwards, two kids argue about the final play and begin to fight. That's when Morgan breaks it up, and one of them, the star player, James, the other is a friend, Damien. This scene does a great job of showing James's previous relationship with Morgan until Rodney shows up again and the coach runs out to scare them away. And oddly enough, the coach and Morgan do not exchange one word. Later that night, Morgan is celebrating his mother's birthday when they flash to Damien's unalived body, and the lead detective is moving with purpose, with his partner attempting to talk him down, continuing the party until a mysterious knock on the door. It's the detective looking to arrest Morgan. Morgan? Morgan? He is an FBI agent, but I guess this is the reason why they were taking pictures all day. At the police station, immediately we can feel the animosity between Morgan and the detective, which really shows their history in a brief flash. Also, Morgan rightfully shows resistance to the partner, as well as the detective, who we learn is named Gordinsky. Odd name for an odd character. Then Morgan asks to call Hotch in order to fill him in on the situation. Unfortunately, the call was already going to be made. As soon as Hotch gets the news, he calls his team in to help assess the situation, and more importantly, to help Morgan. Meanwhile, Morgan has been in an interrogation room all night when Gordinsky shows up with boxes that have Derek's name on them, and
Pretend you went home and slept. Put an empty box with my name on a table right in front of me. The FBI invented this stuff, you simple bastard. We teach it.
it's bad when you're so far out of touch that you're using profiler tactics on a profiler. Like, seriously, I'm pretty sure there are previous episodes with this exact tactic in it. Anyway, we then see the pictures from the day before. This is when Morgan admits to taking one of the kids home from the youth center, and that's when the glass shatters because that kid is now unalive, and the prime suspect is Derek. This is when Hotchner and the team arrive on scene to sort out this whole misunderstanding. And I love how Hotch handles meeting the partner, both forceful and with enough tact to show how good he is as a leader and understanding the red tape and bureaucracy of the police force. They also get a chance to talk with Morgan, also.
I profiled him? It's all right there.
Which, even though Gideon didn't profile specifically for Morgan, it does show that he cares because in his mind, it's almost a betrayal for his team member, even though he did not have any ill will towards Morgan. This is kind of a low blow because typically when they even have the wrong suspect in custody, it's not somebody as close to them as Morgan is. Plus, Morgan usually does everything he can to save as many people as possible. I could almost make a clip show of how many times that he's ran down a serial killer or an SAer. So for Gordinsky to use this profile to lead him to Morgan is very unfounded. Now, during the interrogation, Gordinsky shows the other victims and they correspond with Morgan's visits, which doesn't look good. However, why would a trained FBI agent dump bodies in a way that could be found and during the time that he's in a different location?
This don't make no sense.
This is when Morgan name drops Rodney as a potential suspect, but Gordinsky isn't going for it. Before he leaves to meet the team, Hotch is able to talk with Morgan as Gordinsky thanks Gideon for profiling this case, leading to Morgan's arrest. And the team attempt to persuade Gordinsky to no avail. Meanwhile, Hotch meets with Morgan and begins to explain why he is there when Gordinsky discusses all of the victims of the case, and there's an amazing scene of Gordinsky going through the profile until one is left, standing right in front of them, Morgan. Then Morgan tells the story of finding the first victim abandoned in a lot because of a failed catch of a football. This shook Morgan up so much that he collected money in order to give him a burial site that Morgan revisits every time he's in town because he has empathy, but it is very misconstrued as guilt. Also, they don't have a name on the tombstone due to it being a John Doe. Then Gordinsky explains why he is hell-bent on Morgan being the unsub, and we learn that Morgan has a criminal record, and Gideon is trying to rally his team with Reed saying something profound.
One begins to twist facts to suit theories instead of theories to suit facts. It's one of Sherlock Holmes' favorite quotes.
And Gideon decides to find the unsub before Morgan is locked up. So he splits the team up, Reed and Prentice going to the family with the partner, even though they really don't want to. When Hotch returns, he gets a taste of what Morgan's youth was like, with plenty of charges in his juvenile files. Then,
since when is the criminal history of a suspect not relevant?
You just called him a suspect.
when I first saw this scene, it almost took my breath away just from how quickly Hotch goes from, this is my friend, he's not a suspect, to calling him specifically a suspect. Then Hotch leaves to meet with Morgan, as JJ is tasked to work with Garcia in order to make sense of Morgan's record. Once Hotch returns, Morgan attempts to push this back on Rodney again until Hotch throws the juvenile file directly in his face. Morgan becomes extremely defensive and regales the story of the aggravated battery where someone got hurt, and that's when Hotch brings up victimology, referring to Morgan. He in turn gets extremely upset, and rightfully so, when he reveals that he wants just a little bit of privacy. Hotch is skeptical of Morgan's defensiveness. In the meantime, at Morgan's mom's house, Reed and Prentice interview Morgan's family and find that Gordinsky has a chip on his shoulder when it comes to Derek. Then Reed spouts out,
law enforcement officials are just as probable statistically to commit a crime as anyone else. Look at the cross-section of a society. There's a general population and a small fraction of this percentage.
He's not actually saying we believe Derek is involved in this.
Oh, no, yeah, not at all. I'm merely, speaking theoretically.
You're Dr. Reed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Derek talks about you.
He does?
which is amazing because Morgan talks about him outside of work. Also, it's interesting that in this scene, the only person eating cake is Reed, symbolizing the bond Reed has with Morgan, or it could just be really good cake. Anyway, Prentice attempts to get the family to understand what's happening and how this could be a plot to get Morgan arrested, and he or she is doing an amazing job at it, but they learn about the youth center from earlier in the episode and how important the center was to Morgan. Then Hotch has a conversation with Gideon about secrets on the team. It is interesting them having this conversation about Morgan, but not when Reed revealed his mother was a schizophrenic, but I digress. Gideon defends the thought of secrets on the team, showing just how much more experience he has over Hotch. Meanwhile, JJ is talking to Garcia in order to learn as much as possible about Morgan's youth, much to her chagrin. And they learn some basics, like he was a quarterback and got a scholarship to school, and a newspaper clipping of finding that body in the alleyway. Then, back at the house, the mom explains Morgan's troubled past due to seeing his father, KIA, stopping a robbery. Then Morgan decided to act out, and after a fight, Gordinsky picked Morgan up for the first time and took special interest even when Morgan wasn't even involved. Then the coach from the beginning, named Carl Buford, took young Morgan under his wing and even helped Morgan get that scholarship. Next, Prentice goes to the youth center as JJ and Garcia find Morgan's criminal history.
There's a sealed file.
Unseal it?
But it's a sealed file.
Garcia, helping him.
Right.
And if he had that conviction, it could mean that he wouldn't be eligible for scholarships. This was brought up by Carl Buford, who just so happens to be at the police station with the recent victim's mother. That's a little convenient. This is when Gordinsky starts palling around with Carl. Then Gideon talks with Morgan, and Morgan pleads to leave. Unfortunately, Gideon believes this to be a bad idea, and I hate to agree with him, but the best move is to catch the unsub to clear Morgan's name. Also, Gideon reveals the truth about the profile, which seems to be a knife in Morgan's back. That doesn't help when Gideon asks about the things Morgan isn't revealing, and Morgan justifying it because he just wants a little bit of privacy. Then Hotch and Gideon talk with JJ, who points them to Carl. As this is happening, Prentice arrives at the youth center. She sees Carl's office and meets up with James, who wants to talk with Morgan, and Prentice takes down a message for Morgan. As Hotch and Gideon talk with Carl, who is happy to talk and seems guilty of helping Morgan stay out of the police system, and even brings up Gordinsky's assurance that Morgan is the right suspect. Carl does have some odd happenings with the kid that perished due to the fact that he was the witness to Morgan talking with the kid and taking him home. This is very odd that Morgan never talks with Carl. Then Gideon uses his profiling skills to subtly accuse Carl of being the unsub, which Gordinsky does pick up pretty quickly. It is interesting to me how good Gideon is at his job. Next, Hotch meets with Morgan, and when Hotch brings up Carl, and after revealing they know about him clearing Morgan's name, Morgan begins to get very upset and gets downright angry when Hotch questions him about why he stays away from his surrogate father figure. And after this questioning, Hotch allows Morgan to leave to get to the bottom of this in a way that only Morgan can. As the police put an APB out on him, Gordinsky is pissed that the team allowed Morgan to leave. As we see Morgan skirting the police, JJ attempts to get Gordinsky to see reason, but that fails miserably. As they try to figure out where Morgan went, Hotch realizes where Morgan is hiding. Next, we see Morgan meet with James to talk about Carl and Morgan. For the first time, he reveals to James he knows what Carl has been doing to him, taking him on trips and being as close to a father as he possibly could get. But it is for a price. I wish I could show this scene in its entirety, but because of YouTube, I can't. It is an amazing scene where Morgan talks about the quid pro quo of what was happening to him as a child, and it is very heartbreaking. To see this guy who is extremely muscular, very even-tempered, to break down like this shows just how powerful Carl is, even to this day, after everything has been said and done. And Shamar Moore, who plays Morgan, knocked this scene out of the park. That's when James talks about how Damien pleaded for him to come forward, and that's what sealed his grave. Finally, Morgan confronts Carl and lays everything out on the line. And the most praise to this scene in particular to Shamar Moore for the emotion that he brings to this scene.
I pulled you out of the gutter.
I pulled myself out of the gutter all the way to the FBI. I did that!
You saying I had nothing to do with making you who you are? No, Carl. Actually, I'm saying you have everything to do with making me who I am.
This is so heartbreaking, and it shows why Morgan is so motivated at his job. Thankfully, Gordinsky finally sees the light, and Carl is put in jail. At the end of this scene, we see Gordinsky wordlessly apologize to Morgan. At the end of the episode, the team pay their respects for Damien and the other victims. Even Gordinsky shows up, and Morgan was finally able to put something on that tombstone. This episode is a tour de force. From accusing an FBI agent to uncovering a monster as someone who is a pillar for the community, it did a good job of suspense and showing Morgan's backstory in one of the best episodes in this show. Made more interesting that one of the bad guys is basically just being a detective, fueled by vengeance. He can't see the forest through the trees. Also, it's interesting how the team had to figure this out almost handcuffed by red tape. And don't even get me started on the side characters who did an amazing job of being able to make it seem like they were actually friends and family of Morgan. Especially with James. It is hard for adults to feign like a friendship that's been rooted for years, and for a child to do it really shows how good of an actor he really is. Thank you for watching. If you are curious on how a spy survives after being fired, check out my other series, Burned Notice. Link in the description. And as always, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.